Chapter 1, The Storm. The rain hammered down in sheets, relentless and unforgiving. Lightning cracked across the dark Texas sky, illuminating the cracked dirt road where Jonathan Wilson stumbled, soaked to the bone. His clothes clung to him like second skin, heavy and cold. His green eyes, sharp and searching, scanned the horizon for any sign of refuge. He didn't know where he was, just that he had to keep moving. Shelter wasn't just a want, it was a need. Somewhere to rest. Somewhere to disappear, even if just for a night. That's when the weathered farmhouse appeared through the downpour. David Miller's place. The only light in miles. Jonathan hesitated, drenched and shivering, before knocking. The door swung open before he could think twice. David stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, his expression unreadable. Gray eyes meeting Jonathan's, sharp like a blade but tempered with a flicker of something softer. "You can come in," David said, voice rough but steady. Inside, the warmth hit Jonathan like a wave. He sank into it gratefully, every ache in his body aching to relax. David disappeared down the hall. Jonathan, alone now, began peeling off his wet clothes, the fabric sticking stubbornly. He hung his pants and boxers over a rickety wooden chair to dry. When David returned, shirt in hand, he froze. Jonathan stood there, bare and vulnerable, every muscle defined, skin slick from rain and chill. The tension in the room shifted, thick and electric. David's jaw dropped slightly, eyes tracing every line of Jonathan's body. Jonathan caught his stare and smirked, breaking the silence. "Is that for me?" David swallowed hard, his stoic mask cracking just a little. The storm outside raged on, but inside, something far more dangerous had begun to stir. Chapter 2, Shelter and Distance. The rain stopped by morning, leaving behind the thick scent of wet soil and the rhythmic drip of water from the eaves. The world outside was still, but inside David's mind, something churned. Head barely slept. He told himself it was the storm. The noise. The disruption of routine. Not the image of Jonathan, naked, unbothered, confident. David had tossed the man a blanket and pointed toward the barn. No guest room. No invitation to stay inside the house. Just enough kindness to quiet the voice in his head screaming, "Don't get close." Now, from the kitchen window, he watched as Jonathan stretched in the early light, shirtless, barefoot, his jeans clinging damp around his waist. The barn doors were propped open, and Jonathan moved like he belonged to the land, comfortable, careless. David sipped his coffee, jaw tight. He didn't need this. He didn't need him. But when he walked out with a bucket of feed, their eyes met. Jonathan didn't smile, didn't flinch, just held his gaze like a challenge. "You always make your guests sleep in the barn?" Jonathan asked, his voice rough from the cold night. David looked away. "Didn't know you were staying." Jonathan shrugged. "Didn't know I had a choice." Silence stretched between them, thick as the Texas heat beginning to rise. "I can work," Jonathan said after a beat. "I don't need charity." "I didn't offer any." David handed him a shovel. "You want to stay, you pull your weight. I don't have time for freeloaders." Jonathan smiled, finally. "Good. I don't like being owned." They worked side by side all morning, clearing brush, hauling hay, fixing fence posts. Sweat gathered on their necks, backs, brows. They barely spoke. But each moment near one another felt charged, like flint scraping steel. Every brush of their shoulders. Every grunt of exertion. Every stolen glance. David kept his eyes down, pretending not to notice the muscles rippling under Jonathan's sun-warmed skin. Pretending his hands didn't itch with want. By dusk, the tension was unbearable. David handed him a plate of cornbread and beans, silent as ever. Jonathan took it without a word and sat on the porch steps, eating with quiet hunger. "Thanks," he said eventually. David leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Just food. But it wasn't. They both knew it. Nothing was just anything anymore. Chapter 3, Thursday Nights. Thursday came like clockwork, an unspoken ritual carved from years of habit. David stood on the porch, waiting for the familiar rumble of Roger's truck. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the cracked earth. Roger pulled up just as the crickets began their evening chorus, rugged and steady, like everything else about him. Their eyes met, soft with history, heavy with unsaid things. Inside, the farmhouse felt smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in on David's carefully maintained silence. Roger shed his jacket and boots without a word, moving toward David with a casual confidence born of years sharing these stolen nights. They didn't need to speak. David's hands were rough, calloused from farm work, but tonight they trembled slightly as Roger pulled him close. The familiar press of skin, the scent of smoke and sweat, the rhythm of bodies moving in sync. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Roger's touch lingered longer, searching. David's eyes flicked away, haunted. When their bodies finally came apart, Roger traced a finger down David's cheek, hesitant. "You're here," he said quietly. "But you're not really here." David's jaw tightened. "I'm trying," he said, voice low and strained. Roger nodded, but the crease between his brows deepened. He knew better. Later, as Roger lay beside him, David stared at the ceiling, heart pounding with a mix of guilt and something rawer, desire for something more, something forbidden. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Inside, a quiet storm was just beginning. Chapter 4, A Stranger's Eyes. The late afternoon sun slanted low, warming Jonathan's skin as he perched on the rickety wooden fence. His heart hammered in his chest, eyes locked on the farmhouse window where shadows moved inside. Through the cracked glass, he saw them, David and Roger, intimate and tangled in a dance he wasn't invited to but couldn't look away from. Roger's hands roamed over David's broad back, fingers tracing the taut muscles beneath sweat-darkened skin. David's jaw clenched tight, eyes flicking away as if trying to vanish from the world. Jonathan's breath hitched, the heat pooling low in his belly. His hands slipped beneath his jeans, fingers curling around the familiar roughness. He closed his eyes, the sounds from inside, the low murmur of their voices, the scrape of a shirt pulled off, filling his mind. His strokes quickened, slick skin sliding against skin. "Don't stop," he whispered, voice raw with need. Peeking through the window again, he caught David's sharp profile, the tension in his neck, the way Roger's lips brushed his ear. Jonathan's pulse hammered in his throat. He imagined those lips on him, those strong hands, exploring, claiming. His hips pressed harder into his palm, breath ragged. "Please," he breathed, "I want him." A shadow crossed David's face, pain? Desire? It was impossible to tell. Jonathan swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he neared the edge. The world outside was silent but for the distant hum of insects. Inside, the air was thick with secrets and promises unspoken. Jonathan came quietly, eyes still fixed on the fractured tableau inside the window, aching for more than just shelter. Chapter 5, Hired Hands and Idle Hearts. The Texas sun hammered down like a furnace as Jonathan worked beside David, the sweat pouring off their skin in rivers. The barn reeked of hay and dust, thick enough to taste on their tongues. Jonathan's muscles ached, but it was the heat between them, the barely spoken, electric charge, that made his pulse race. David worked methodically, silent except for the scrape of tools and grunt of effort. His gray eyes kept flicking to Jonathan, measuring, calculating. "Keep up," David said, voice low but firm. "I don't do charity." Jonathan wiped his brow, heart thudding in his chest. "I'm not here for that." Their hands brushed as they lifted a heavy bale of hay. The contact was brief but searing, fire licked his skin. David's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened just a fraction. Later, when the work slowed, Jonathan leaned against the sun-baked wood, breathing heavy. David stood too close, the heat radiating off him, muscles tense under his worn shirt. "You're not just passing through," David said quietly. Jonathan met his gaze, green eyes shimmering. "No. Not anymore." David's hand grazed Jonathan's arm, a promise or a warning, and the world tilted on its axis. That night, the barn smelled of sweat and hay, thick and heady. Jonathan undressed slowly, hanging his wet clothes to dry as David watched, breath-catching. When Jonathan stood bare beneath the cracked window, the moonlight tracing every curve, David's breath hitched. The distance between them felt like a battlefield. Chapter 6, Tension Snaps. The night pressed heavy against the barn walls, sweat slick and thick with anticipation. Every breath they took mingled, every glance a silent dare. David's eyes darkened as he stepped closer, the years of silence and restraint unraveling with each heartbeat. Jonathan's skin tingled under the heat of David's gaze, hunger igniting a fire that refused to be ignored. "Stop hiding," Jonathan whispered, voice rough with want. David's hand closed around Jonathan's wrist, pulling him into a brutal, aching kiss. Teeth grazed lips, tongues tangled, a desperate collision. Their bodies pressed tight, raw muscle against warm skin, the scent of earth and sweat and need. Clothes were discarded with frantic urgency, hands mapping the bare flesh revealed. David's touch was fierce, demanding, breaking down walls Jonathan hadn't known existed. Jonathan gasped as David's mouth trailed down his neck, teeth nipping, fingers digging into his hips. The barn seemed to shrink, the world narrowing to the slick slide of skin, the heavy thud of hearts. Jonathan arched into David's grip, craving more, aching to be seen and taken. When they finally came together, rough, desperate, unrelenting, the air cracked with the force of years of bottled-up desire exploding at last. Afterward, they lay tangled in the hay, chests rising and falling, the silence between them finally spoken. David's voice was raw. "This changes everything." Jonathan's smile was slow, sure. "Maybe that's what we need." Chapter 7, Roger's Gut. Thursday night arrived heavy and charged, but it wasn't the usual rhythm. Roger's truck rolled up slower, quieter, tension sitting thick behind his steady eyes. Inside the farmhouse, the familiar scent of David's cologne was tainted by something new, an edge Roger couldn't place. David didn't meet his gaze, hands busy with the dishes but trembling slightly. Roger's gut twisted, a slow-burning ache growing with every silent second. "We need to talk," Roger said, voice low but firm, breaking the brittle quiet. David's jaw clenched. "There's nothing to say." Roger stepped closer, eyes searching the guarded face he'd known for years. "Don't lie to me, David. I know something's changed." David's breath hitched, pain and guilt flashing across his face. "It's not you. It's complicated." "Complicated? Or someone else?" The words hung heavy, raw and accusing. David looked away, shoulders tightening. "Jonathan." Roger's heart clenched, bitter and bruised. "So, that's it. I'm just a Thursday night thing now." David shook his head, voice cracking. "I didn't mean for this," Roger cut him off, anger flaring. "You didn't mean for this? Maybe I deserve better than leftovers and half-truths." The room pulsed with their unsaid fears and broken promises. Roger's hands clenched into fists. "If you want him, say it. If not, then tell me where I stand." David swallowed hard, caught between past and present, loyalty and desire. "I don't know," he admitted, voice barely a whisper. Roger's eyes burned with pain. "Then maybe I'm already losing you." Chapter 8, Whiskey and Walls. The night was thick with silence as Roger poured whiskey into 2 chipped glasses, the amber liquid catching the dim light of the kitchen. Jonathan sat across the table, fingers drumming nervously on the worn wood. Neither man knew where this conversation would lead, if anywhere. Roger's voice was rough but steady. "You're here for David. I can see it." Jonathan met his gaze, green eyes honest, vulnerable. "I didn't plan on it, but yeah. He's different. Broken in ways I understand." Roger's jaw tightened. "He's my history, my pain. I've stood in his shadow for years." Jonathan nodded slowly. "I know what it's like to be waiting for something, someone, that might never come." Roger's laugh was bitter. "Waiting is all I've done." They drank, the warmth of the whiskey easing some of the tension but not the ache beneath. "Do you want to break him?" Roger asked bluntly. Jonathan shook his head. No. I want to help him heal. Maybe that means breaking down some walls. Roger's eyes flickered with hope and fear. And what about me? Where do I fit in your plans? Jonathan's fingers curled around his glass. I don't know yet. But I'm not here to hurt anyone. Roger leaned back, exhaustion and resignation mixing on his face. Maybe that's the best any of us can hope for. The night stretched on, filled with unspoken truths and fragile understanding. Two men, each fighting for a piece of the same broken heart. Chapter 9, Secrets and Shirts. The barn smelled of dust and faded memories as Jonathan's fingers brushed against a faded photograph tucked inside an old wooden crate. A man with kind eyes smiled back, a younger David, holding another man close. His breath caught. Nearby, worn-out shirts hung on a rusted nail, their fabric soft and thin from years of wear. Jonathan traced the stitching with trembling hands. David's past whispered in the silence. When David appeared in the doorway, the tension thickened. His eyes darkened, shadowed by grief that refused to fade. You found that, David said quietly, voice rough like gravel. Jonathan nodded, meeting his gaze. Who is he? David swallowed hard, stepping inside, closing the door against the past. My husband, he said, voice breaking. Gone 7 years. Jonathan's heart clenched at the rawness in David's eyes, the weight of love lost, of silence and guilt. I'm sorry, Jonathan whispered. David shook his head. Sorry won't bring him back. They stood there, two broken men connected by pain. Jonathan reached out, fingers brushing David's arm. You don't have to carry it alone. David's walls trembled, a crack forming where hope could seep in. For the first time, he let the grief spill free. Chapter 10, Collision. The farmhouse was drenched in the heavy silence that hung between them, thick, electric, impossible to ignore. Jonathan's green eyes burned with unspoken need as he caught David's glance across the dimly lit room. Roger stood steady beside David, his rugged frame a reassuring presence, but the tension was palpable. David's breath hitched as Jonathan stepped closer, his hands trembling ever so slightly. Are we really doing this? His voice was rough, raw, vulnerability threading through the edge. Roger's hand found David's, squeezing with quiet confidence. If this is what we want, then yes. Jonathan's lips curved into a slow, sure smile. No more pretending. No more holding back. Clothes fell away, shirts peeled off, pants unzipped, boxer briefs slipped down in a cascade of bare skin and exposed muscle. The cool air kissed their heated bodies, sending goosebumps across David's arms. Jonathan's hands moved over David's broad chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart beneath taut skin. The roughness of calloused palms met the softness of bare flesh, igniting a wildfire of sensation. Roger's lips trailed down David's neck, teasing and grounding, his breath hot against chilled skin. David's fingers tangled in Jonathan's hair, pulling him closer as his other hand gripped Roger's shoulder, desperate to hold on to something real. Jonathan's body pressed against David's, their hips grinding slowly at first, teasing, tasting the newness of this shared space. Roger's hands roamed, tracing the sharp planes of David's back, slipping lower with reverence and hunger. The room filled with gasps, low moans, and the slick sound of skin sliding against skin. Every touch spoke volumes, apologies, confessions, desires too long buried. David's voice broke free in a ragged whisper, I want this. All of this. Roger kissed him deeply, hands steady and sure, while Jonathan's lips found his collarbone, trailing fire along sensitive nerves. When they finally came together, fingers entwined, bodies moving in a messy, beautiful harmony, the collision was overwhelming. Sweat-slick skin pressed tight, breath mingled, hearts pounded like thunder in their chests. Jonathan's green eyes locked on David's gray ones, a silent promise shimmering in the heat of the moment. The night stretched, endless and raw, an intimate dance of pleasure, pain, and healing. And as the first light of dawn crept through the window, the three of them lay tangled, breathing slow, bodies sated, and hearts forever altered. Chapter 11, Quiet After the Flame. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the cracked window, casting soft shadows across the tangled sheets. The room was thick with the lingering warmth of bodies spent and hearts unguarded. David lay between Jonathan and Roger, their limbs intertwined like fragile threads weaving a new tapestry, one stitched from desire, pain, and tentative hope. His breath was slow, steady, but his gray eyes were heavy with emotions head buried for years. Jonathan's green eyes met his, gentle and searching. "How do you feel?" David's jaw clenched, then relaxed. "Exposed. But free. Like I'm finally allowed to be." Roger brushed a stray lock of hair from David's forehead, his rough fingers tender. "We all carry scars, David. Doesn't mean we have to carry them alone." Jonathan shifted closer, resting his head against David's chest. The steady beat beneath his ear was a quiet reminder that this fragile connection was real. David's hand traced lazy circles on Jonathan's back, grounding himself in the moment. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Scared of losing it. Scared of feeling again." Jonathan squeezed his shoulder. "Fear's part of healing. But you don't have to face it by yourself." Roger's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "We're here. All of us." For the first time in years, David let the walls around his heart crack wide open. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full. Full of possibility. And in that quiet after the flame, something fragile and fierce took root. Chapter 12, Oklahoma Ghosts. The evening sky outside the farmhouse faded into a blanket of stars, vast and indifferent. Inside, the three men sat close, the flickering light of a single lamp casting warm shadows on their faces. Jonathan's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his drink, swallowing hard before he finally spoke. "I haven't told you everything," he said, voice low and heavy. "There's a reason I'm here, why I keep moving, searching." David and Roger listened, silent and steady. Jonathan's green eyes darkened with memory. "I grew up in Oklahoma. It wasn't a good place for someone like me, running, hiding. But I had one thing that kept me going, my brother." He paused, the words thick with longing. "He's the only family I have left. We got separated years ago, when things got bad. I have this feeling, this hope, that he's somewhere out west. Maybe California." David's fingers brushed Jonathan's hand, a small gesture heavy with unspoken support. "I'm chasing that hope," Jonathan continued, voice cracking. "But I'm scared. Scared I'll never find him. Scared I'm all he has left." Roger cleared his throat softly. "Family isn't just blood," he said. "It's who stands by you when the world turns its back." Jonathan gave a small, shaky smile. "Maybe I'm looking for more than just my brother. Maybe I'm looking for a family I never had." David's gaze held Jonathan's, something unspoken passing between them, a promise, a shared vulnerability. The night stretched on, filled with quiet truths and the fragile beginnings of trust. Chapter 13, New Mexico Farewell. The farmhouse felt smaller tonight, the walls closing in with a bittersweet weight. Jonathan's bag sat packed by the door, a silent reminder that morning would bring goodbye. David stood by the window, watching the dark horizon, the last flicker of hope warring with the ache in his chest. Roger leaned against the doorframe, his rugged face soft but tense. Jonathan approached, eyes shining with unshed tears and fierce determination. "Before I go," he said quietly, "I want one last night. All of us. No holding back." David swallowed hard, heart pounding. "Are you sure?" Roger nodded slowly. "This isn't easy for any of us, but maybe it's what we need." The night unfolded in a raw, urgent dance, hands and mouths exploring every inch of skin, bodies moving together in a fevered rhythm. The past months of longing, fear, and pain ignited in every touch, every gasp. Jonathan's lips trailed from David's jaw to his collarbone, while Roger's hands roamed possessively over Jonathan's back. Their connection was fierce and fragile, a final act of love and release. Time lost meaning, only the heat of their shared desire remained, pulsing through the room. When at last they collapsed, tangled and breathless, the silence between them was heavy but full. Jonathan pressed a kiss to David's forehead. "Thank you for this. For everything." David whispered back, "You've changed us." Roger's hand covered theirs both. "Wherever you go, you carry a piece of us." Roger added softly, "We hope you find your brother. And come back to us." Jonathan turned to Roger, kissing him gently. Then he looked into David's eyes and said, "Roger is always here for you. Love him. He'll bring you peace." He pulled back, his voice tender. "I'll be back soon. I hope you both will still hug me when I do." Morning would come, and with it, parting. But tonight was theirs. Epilogue: The dust settles. The New Mexico sun was harsher, drier. Jonathan felt it in his bones as he stepped off the bus, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a folded photo tucked deep in his wallet. It was taken that last morning, David half smiling, Roger's hand on his shoulder, the porch behind them bathed in gold. He hadn't found his brother yet. Just leads, whispers, dead ends. But the search gave him purpose. And somewhere in the desert stillness, he found a little peace. Some nights, he dreamed of Texas. Of thick heat and Thursday nights. Of David's eyes, the way they softened when no one was looking. Of Roger's rough laugh, always grounding. Back on the farm, David had replaced the barn door Jonathan broke that first night. But he hadn't touched the worn cot. Sometimes he sat there, fingers tracing the wood, wondering where the road had taken him. Roger still came on Thursdays. But now, he stayed longer. Sometimes, he didn't leave. They rarely spoke of Jonathan aloud. But when a green-eyed stranger passed through town, both men turned, hearts skipping like stones. Jonathan would return one day. Not when he was fixed, he wasn't broken, but when the road no longer pulled so hard. And when he did, he knew the porch light would be on.